Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Angela Rola. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the founding director of the Asian American Cultural Center at the University of Connecticut on the Storrs campus. I have served as the center director for 32 years, and just recently I have taken another position as senior director for inclusion and community. So to leave the center, I'm not really going too far because, they're still going to be part of my portfolio. But to leave the center is a little bittersweet. This has been part of my career here at the university. It's been all of my career at the university. And it's been a real honor to be able to build something that is sustainable and has had great impact on generations of students. But, with everything that starts, there is always a story. And I think the story of the founding or the creation of the center is important for people to know. I believe that if we don't understand our history, especially if it is a troubled history, we are doomed to repeat it. And there are many lessons to learn from what occurred that led to the creation of the cultural center. So let me take you back to 1987. It's December of 1987, and one of the residence halls has decided to have a semi-formal, probably a term that we don't use very often in today's world, but a formal for the students, and it was going to be an off-campus event. And so with anything that is offered by the university, particularly if it's off campus, adequate transportation needs to be provided to and from the venue. And so students were very excited about this, and they were getting dressed up, and 8 students who identified as Asian Americans were going as friends to this semi-formal that was going to be held in, Bolton, Connecticut, probably about a 15-minute ride on the bus from Storrs, to the venue. And when they boarded the bus, because they were the last to board the bus, there was not 8 seats together on the bus, so that they were spread, in different seats. And in the back of the bus, there were 2 students who were, quote, unquote, "well on their way to a good time," and that's a quote from many of the articles that were written about this particular event. And so one can make some assumptions about what that means. Had they started to have, to drink and, prepare themselves to have a good time. That wasn't revealed, but it was interesting to hear that it was quote unquote they prepared to have a good time. And they approached the 8 students and these 2 men, also UConn students, said to the students, "You gooks, you chinks." Now, this 1987, the term "gook" was a derogatory term that came out of the Vietnam War for Vietnamese people, and "chinks," as we knew, is directed at Chinese folks. "You gooks, you chinks, you go back to where you belong." The problem with that particular statement is it's something that the Asian community has had to deal with because our faces denotes to other people that we don't belong here, that we have to be coming from somewhere else, that the idea of us also being American born and American citizens is for some people a foreign notion. And so we are looked at as the minority that is the perpetual foreigner. And so the idea to tell these students to go back to where you belong was interesting because many of the students were American born and they hailed from Hartford, Bridgeport, right here in Connecticut. So where do you want them to go back to? You want them to go back to those respective towns. In addition to calling them names, they were also spit upon, and these 2 men young men were chewing tobacco. So chewing tobacco was hitting their faces, the men's suits and the women's dresses. And as we know, the human reaction to an incident like that is fight or flight. And most people decided to take the flight route and figured that if they didn't say anything, perhaps it would die down. But just the opposite happened. The harassment continued throughout the bus ride. Nobody seemed to come to the aid of the students, no other students, nor did the bus driver. And in addition to the students being there, there were resident assistants who were also students. And resident assistants are students who work in the residence halls and have responsibility to making sure that their residents are following the rules and the regulations of living there. So they get to the place, and what had ensued in the bus were that the Asian American males spoke to the other males to say, why don't we want to have a good time? We want you to have a good time. Why don't you just leave us alone? But the harassment continued, and it continued in at the venue on the dance floor, where even the women were mooned by these two men, and the name calling continued. The women felt so unsafe that most of the night they spent hiding in a closet until they decided they really needed to go and call the police department. They had asked to return on the bus, but were told that they were not going to have the bus return with just 8 people on. And pretty much they just had to, quote unquote, suck it up and enjoy the rest of the evening until the bus was to leave at midnight. So the women who were hiding in the closet decide that they're going to call the police department. And thinking they were in the neighboring town, they called the Vernon police. And the Vernon police had told them, well, actually, you're UConn students. You should have the UConn police deal with this, and we're not going to get involved. So for the third time that night, nobody helping them on the bus. Um, Nobody helping them, the residents' assistants telling them they couldn't go back on the bus, and then the police department saying, "No, you have to go and have your Yukon police deal with this." So for already 3 times that night, they were not getting any assistance. So they tried to make the best of the evening, although it wasn't a good evening all around, and when they returned to campus after midnight, they called the Yukon police. And the Yukon police told them that it was an incident that technically happened off campus, and so they should have called the off-campus police. So now we're talking about 4 times of getting no help. Well, it's 1987. Things are done differently back then. If we had this happen in 2025, we know that instantaneously social media would have made that go viral. So the students had to wait until Monday until they could go to the dean of students office to tell somebody that something had happened to them. And again, all the accounts that have been written on this particular event showed that there was not, that people, the administrators did not really believe that this happened to the students and questioned, really, did it happen to them? Were they mistaken that something like this happened to them? But the women had presence of mind at least to say, well, we can at least prove that somebody was spitting something because our dresses and our suits are stained with chewing tobacco. Um, and so the students just felt like they were left without any help or recourse. And what they did was they sought the help of a tenure track faculty member, and his name was Dr. Paul Bach, who was a civil engineering professor. And Dr. Bach, identified as Chinese American from the West Coast, who is seventh generation Chinese American. And I was working at that time at the UConn Foundation, and Dr. Bach had formed the Asian Faculty and Staff Association, and the students within that were involved in the event, in the incident, formed the Asian American Student Association, which did not exist on campus at that time. And those two groups came together to talk about what had happened at that incident. And somebody had called me, knew that I was working at the foundation, and said, "We've started this association. We know that you work here. Are you interested in being part of this?" And I was very interested. I had read all about and was horrified about the incident. And so I joined this Asian Faculty and Staff Association, and the two groups decided that we were going to put together um, some recommendations for the university. And the three recommendations was the creation of an Asian American Cultural Center, the creation of an Asian American Studies program so that courses in Asian American issues, Asian American history, sociology, political science, and so on, English could be taught. There were many courses that were Asian based, but nothing that talked about the Asian American experience. And then the third demand was more resources for the Homer Babbage Library so that they could build up their collection of books, periodicals, magazines, films on the Asian American experience. And that work got started in 1988, the spring right after the event. And Dr. Bach decided that he himself would go on a hunger strike, and he pitched a tent behind our student union, and every day he would come in and he would stay in his tent and he would protest the discrimination against Asians on the UConn campus. Um, he even went to commencement that year, that May, carrying protest signs, bringing to bear the discrimination of Asian Americans on campus. He was a warrior. Um, and what he had told me as I got to know him was that, as an Asian American himself, that he felt that he himself was so whitewashed that the students coming to him and asking for his help was really a wake up call for himself, and that he had to really look himself in the mirror and ask, how do you identify? Why are you denying who you are? And, you know, really doing some soul searching. And so that spring, he continued to do that. The group met with the administration, was met with some resistance, and it actually took 5 years of constant meeting and constant advocating that Asian Americans, who were at the time and continues to be the largest minority groups on campus or underrepresented groups on campus, that they too deserve to have resources that spoke about their needs and their issues in their community. And that took a lot of convincing. Like I said, it took 5 years. And finally, in 1993, perhaps more likely like the end of 1992, the president at the time, Harry Hartley, and the provost, Tom Tighe, uh, put their heads together, and Dr. Hartley said, "No, we have to open a center. We have to hire a faculty director to start the studies program, and we will give 5,000 seed money, $5,000 seed money to the Homer Babbage Library for them to start their collection." And so in 1993, April 8th, the Asian American Cultural Center opened its doors. In June, the first director for the Asian American Studies program was hired, and the Homer Babbage Library had some resources to build up their collection. I have had the honor of being the founding director of the center, and Dr. Roger Buckley was the founding director of the institute. And the two of us were very intent on making sure that the cultural center and the studies program worked hand in hand. that the experience of students and the focus of the center in helping students be grounded in their cultural identity, help build their leadership skills, and be a place where students could really find themselves and feel that that was a safe and brave space for them to explore and talk to others about what it was like to be Asian American, also fed into students thriving in the classroom. And so Dr. Buckley started to hire faculty who would teach Asian American English, literature, Asian American sociology classes, American political science classes, and so on. And so we actively now have a minor in Asian American Studies. Students can take classes and minor in that in the hopes of us building that up to be a major. Um, we now have, we just got a big grant in the Hartford campus called AAPI for Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution Grant. And that grant that we got focuses on our Hartford campus, where we have 17% Asian identified students, and we are building Asian American courses, a mentoring program, a learning community, and other services and programs that not only benefit Asian American students, but all students, because we feel that all ethnic studies really benefit everybody because that is part of the American diaspora and the American history. And so, what came of a really horrific time in 1987 has grown into, 30 plus years of doing some really hard work, of students really telling us what they needed to do, needed to see, needed to learn. We're always listening to our students. We're seeing, the different immigration patterns of students coming from Asia, becoming American citizens, and those stories are just as important. Our community is also one where there is an increase in mixed race students, Asian and Black, Asian Latinx, Asian white. And so those stories are important to students understand their biracial, bi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-ethnic identities. And so there's so many stories to tell, and that's what we're trying to capture in the work that we're doing at the Cultural Center.